Well, hi there. Welcome to another session of The Teaching Lady. Tonight we are looking at the book of Deuteronomy. We are looking at the book of Deuteronomy and what the author Jim George says in his book that he wrote titled Bones Bible Handbook. It's just a brief synopsis and overview summary of each book in the Bible. And what a great resource this has been so far. Well, tonight we look at Deuteronomy. The theme of Deuteronomy is obedience. Right off the bat, from the beginning, we talk about obedience. And I don't know, I ask myself, am I obedient and do what I'm supposed to do? The Israelites were struggling with obedience back then and what God was wanting them to do. And we're a little further along now in the story, and we're actually in the 40th year of their wilderness trek with Moses. And Moses writes this book, and we're looking at the year that it was written to be about 1405 BC. And we are in the scenic view, the plains of Moab. The book of Deuteronomy takes place entirely in one location over about 1 month. Over about a span of 1 month. Israel is camped out on the east side of the Jordan River across from the walled city of Jericho. And it's been 40 years since Israelites were released from slavery in Egypt, since God brought them out of Egypt. Deuteronomy concentrates on events that take place in the final week or weeks of Moses' life. The major event is the verbal communication of God's divine revelation that Moses had received over the past 39 plus years of wilderness wanderings. I bet he didn't think he was going to be doing all that. The Israelites now have brought in a new audience, a new generation. Remember last time we talked where the first generation was going to go away and that second generation was up and coming. That first generation, if you remember from the book of, I think it was Leviticus. Yeah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers it was. Yeah, Numbers. Where God had, not God, but Moses had sent the 12 spies to go in and check out the land, and 10 of them came back and said, yeah, no way, we can't do, right? And now we are coming up on Jericho, the walls of Jericho. And Moses has appointed Joshua to take over the reins, to take his place. And now we have that second generation coming in that is going to go in and take over the land. We hope they don't get cold feet. Of course, we know after reading the story that they don't, and they are successful. But this new generation, they need instruction in order to prepare for and to prosper in their new land. The 120-year-old Moses gives them 3 farewell speeches. Let's look at the skeleton of the book of Deuteronomy. Chapters 1 through 4 make up the first speech. Looking back over time, Moses gives an historical review of the years and events from Mount Sinai to the present time, as the children of Israel are camped out in the plains of Moab. Chapters 5 through 26 are the second speech. Here, Moses reviews the 10 commandments, and he gives instructions about passing these commands on to the succeeding generations. In addition, he talks about the ceremonial, the civil, and the social laws, and those are reviewed for this new group of people before they inhabit the new land. I love this, that God just doesn't say, okay, you cried out to me from Egypt to come and get you. And I did, so okay, you're free to go. See ya, figure it out. He gives them what they need. He gives them what they need. He tells them, this is how you're going to do it. This is what you're going to do. This is where you're going to do it. This is how many times you're going to do it. This is who's going to be in charge. All these different things that he points out to them so that they know what they're doing. so that they are prepared, that they've been instructed, they've been taught. So that way, when they go into the promised land, that they're not going to fall back into their old ways, that they're not going to fall back into what they saw in Egypt 40 plus years ago. Because, when I think about it, how easy is it for us to just fall back into what is familiar? Even if it's no good, we fall back into what is familiar. And the Israelites run a real risk here of doing that very thing, to fall back into what's familiar, to fall back into what they saw. We've already seen that once already when Moses was up on top of the mountain, and they went to Aaron, his brother, and they said, it doesn't look like old Moses coming down from the mountain. And we need something to worship. And so they take all their jewelry off and they throw it in the fire and they make a golden calf and they start worshiping. They hadn't even gotten to the promised land yet, and they were already making a huge mistake. As we know, God wasn't happy. So, they need this. They need to be reminded. And the thing about the Ten Commandments and those things that they were told, the ceremonial, the civil, and the social, the Ten Commandments especially, are things that we live by today, or should live by today, and should remember. So, chapters 27 through 30 is what they call the third speech. And in dramatic fashion, as part of the final sermon, if you will, Moses positions half the people on one mountain and half on the opposite mountain. He then has the nation's leaders stand in the middle. Addressing first one side and then the other, Moses describes the immediate future with its blessings for obedience and its curses for disobedience. In other words, good things are going to come if you do the right thing. You're going to be blessed. But if you choose to sin, you're choosing to suffer. There are consequences for bad choices, for bad decisions. We see that even today. He then prophesies what will happen in the distant future when Israel disobeys God, and in judgment the people are scattered among the nations. Then Moses proclaims that, true to his promises, God will eventually bring the people back to their beloved land. Here you have a guy that in his third and final speech is speaking to the Israelites and saying, this is what's going to happen. He knew they were going to run into a problem, but he also knew that God in his goodness and his grace was going to bring them back to the promised land one day, to their beloved land. Well, chapters 31 and 30, it's a new word, by the way, 31 through 34 are the concluding events of the book of Deuteronomy. And in these closing chapters of what we call the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books that were written by Moses, Joshua is again confirmed as the new leader of the Israelites. And Moses then makes 2 more short speeches. This guy had a lot to say in the last week of his life. It's like, okay, I've been thinking about this stuff for 40 years, and now I'm going to lay it all on y'all, because I'm fixing to depart from here, right? And of course, he didn't know that exactly when, but you know what I'm saying. So in the first speech, it's called the Song of Moses, and in this prophetic song, Moses describes Israel's coming apostasy, God's judgment, and God's forgiveness and healing of both Israel and the land. In his second mini speech, Moses gives his final blessings to the 12 tribes. Having fulfilled his role as a leader, he goes to the top of a nearby mountain, Nebo, and looks out over the promised land and the other side of the Jordan River. Then he dies, and he's buried by God. So he got to see, the promised land. He never got to go into it, but he got to see it. And then he dies, and he's buried by God. Fascinating. Well, let's put some meat on the bones, shall we? The book of Deuteronomy reveals much about the character and the nature of God. How privileged the world is to have this written testimony of God and his dealings with his people. Anytime that we forget some aspect of God's character or work, the things that he did, the history that we see here in the Bible, we can simply pick it up and read the book of Deuteronomy. This was not the case in Moses' day. The only way to remind this new generation of the wonderful character of God was to rehearse it with them, to orally review it for them, how God honors obedience to his commandments and punishes disobedience. We find that he's saying the same thing again and again. The people needed to hear it again. It wasn't let me tell you one time and then that's it. We'll never mention it again. Paul, I think, does that a lot in his letters where he says the same things. Let me remind you of this again. Let me remind you of this again. And not just to one people group, but to multiple peoples that he says that to. Moses also recounts the people's past history of rebellion and the consequences of their stubbornness. In case you forgot, there was that time. Let me remind you of that. And if you were smart, you wouldn't do that again. There was a lesson. Did you learn the lesson from that time? That you rebelled against God when you couldn't trust him to go into the promised land. You listened to those 10 spies who said, yeah, we can't do it. We can't do it. We're so afraid. We're grasshoppers and they're giants. Right? Let me remind you about that and what happened as a result of your rebellion and your disobedience. We got stuck out here. And I got stuck with you for a long time. But he reminds him of that. We need to be reminded sometimes of things that happen to where we don't make the same mistake. Because quite honestly, disobedience brings consequences, and they're not good consequences. And I think sometimes people are surprised by that. I think sometimes when people do dumb stuff, they're surprised that there's a consequence and that it's usually a negative one. It's as if they said, well, I should be able to do whatever I want and it doesn't matter and there should be nothing. I should have to pay nothing. I should have to repay nothing. I should have to suffer nothing. It's just amazing sometimes. I think people just don't realize that when you choose to do that, to disobey, then you choose to suffer a consequence. It reminds me of parenting. Little kids who choose to lie, who choose to hit one another, who choose to bite. We have to teach them. That's how we teach them, is there's a consequence to that action so that hopefully they don't do it again. But they're also to remember, and he says to the Israelites, they're also to remember that God is present with them. And if they dedicate their lives to him and obey his laws, they will receive his blessings. Isn't that awesome? God is with you. That's like one of the things that when I think about Moses talking to the people and he reminds them, let me just remind you that God is with you. He's been with you. You called out to him 40 years ago and asked him to release you from slavery. He did that. He parted the Red Sea so that you could cross, and you saw Pharaoh and them die in the water. He's been with you for the last 40 years. And there's nothing that says he's just going to drop you here and then take off and go back home. He doesn't do that. That's not who God is. And I think it's because he wants us to love him and to worship him and to follow him with everything. I remember when Jesus quoted, I think it was Deuteronomy 6, it said the most important command is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. And who do we have as an example of love? The ultimate love? God himself. And Moses is reminding them, which, by the way, he is with us. He will be with you. But you got to seek him. Seek him out. You can't just put him over on the sideline and say, yeah, thanks for bringing us. We'll talk to you later. Oftentimes, that's what we do when we get what we need. So God is present with them, and if they dedicate their lives to him and obey his laws, they will receive blessings. It doesn't say they're going to receive some kind of award that will sit on a shelf. It's that they will receive blessings from God himself. How awesome is that? Well, let's flesh this out in our own lives. Moses' instructions concerning the character of God they're still appropriate for today. Learning about God will aid you in your love for him in your pursuit of personal holiness. God is the standard. He's the high mark. He is holy, and he expects holy behavior from us. As a Christian, we're called to be holy as God is holy. We are to love him with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our strength. Deuteronomy 6:5. What are some life lessons from the book of Deuteronomy that we can take with us and apply? Here's one. Let your past failures prepare you for future victories. Realize that God can blot out any sin, but he doesn't always take away its consequence. And here's a really good one. Never forget what you were saved from. I think about that so often in my own life. When I think back back to 1989. When I think about what I was saved from back in 1989, I just shudder and go, God, I was so undeserving of your grace and your mercy. I mean, I can't even believe I'm sitting here talking to you about about the Bible. I just never in a million years saw that coming. Never. I would have never dreamed. But that one night in 1989 changed my life forever. It was so instrumental in where I am today. And, sometimes we have to look at that and we go, when that happens, when we are in that moment, I can just tell you that I never in a million years knew what was coming. All I could see what was right in front of me right then. That's all I could see. I could just see the next 5 minutes. I couldn't see down the road 30 years from now. And I would have never imagined that this would be where I'm at talking to you about the book of Deuteronomy. So never forget what you were saved from and review God's word regularly. It will guide your steps. Not sure how to live, not sure how to follow the Lord, not sure how to love him, not sure how to praise him, not sure how to serve him. The Bible gives you all that. And for free. It gives you all that. It tells you all that. That's the great thing about God is he didn't make it a mystery. I think sometimes we want to make the book, the Bible, a mystery. I think sometimes we want to make God a mystery. And he gave us his word so that he's not a total mystery. Yes, there's things we can't understand. And yes, there's things that we're not going to have answers to. I don't have all the answers. I can just tell you that. There's some things that brilliant scholars of the Bible don't have answers to. So I feel pretty good when I say, I don't know the answer to that. Because that brilliant scholar who does nothing but study doesn't have the answer. And so by faith, I have to believe him. I have to trust that what God's word says is the absolute truth. And I've seen for myself how it has played out in my own life, being in it. So, reviewing his word and letting it guide your steps. Well, let's see, what else do we have? Oh, we have the 10 Commandments. Let's go over those. These actually are first shared with us in the book of Exodus. God, worship him alone, no one else. Just worship God alone. Do not worship images. Do not swear. Obey the Sabbath. Obey your parents. don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet. Those are just, you can go and get the more formal words from those, but it all comes down to these 10 commandments, the basics for our lives. If you can keep from doing, any of those and making sure that you're worshiping God alone and you're not putting any false gods, no idols before him, that includes yourself before him, worshiping him alone and following those other things, you're doing pretty good. You're doing pretty good. You are off to a great start. I think from these things come other things that can build on these 10 commandments. And if you look at I would say the first couple of them really have to do with the Lord. And then the other ones have to do with our behavior towards other people. So you can look at them that way. So that is the book of Deuteronomy. It's a great read. You ought to check it out, especially now that you know a little more background about it. And I'll just finish with this verse from Deuteronomy 10:12, where it says, "What does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways." When you talk about fear, have a good, healthy fear of God, not I'm so afraid of him that he's going to... No, not that kind of fear, but to have a healthy fear of God that I respect and I follow and I study and I read and I serve and I love him. That kind of fear. Not to just be so pumped up and full of ourselves that we go, God, I don't fear him. Whatever. He don't bother me. There are people out in this world that feel that way. They don't believe. I get that. But then I say, you know what? You are missing out on the greatest thing. And one day you're going to meet him face to face. What's your reasoning going to be? Because at that point in time, you're going to have to answer for you and why you didn't believe, why you ignored all the people that came to you over the years of your life and tried to talk to you about God, and why you just said, talk to the hand. You're going to have to answer for that. I can't answer for that. Your friend, family member, whoever can't answer for that. You'll have to answer for that. Only you, one-on-one with the Lord. I always say that when I get to heaven, I always picture God saying, "Oh, did you read you read my book, right? I wrote a book that was a #1 bestseller of all time." And I say that, and I always joke about that because I'm a writer. And so I always think, I want people to read my book. Well, God wants us to read his book too. And it happens to be the #1 bestseller of all time. Like, it doesn't get put on the New York Times bestseller list because it is the bestseller always. It has outsold any other author you can think of, right? And I always imagine God standing there asking people, "So did you read my book?" And they're going to be like, "Well, I didn't understand it, or I never got around to reading it." Yeah, no. I thought it was supposed to look pretty on the table, open to the read words. But I always had dust on it. I don't know. I didn't want to mess with that, and nobody ever told me I had to. Really. But you read all those other books by all those other people, all the magazines, and you scrolled for hours on social media, and you never found time to read my life instructions to you and how much I love you. Yeah, I'm not very intelligent. What are we going to say? I didn't want to be that person that said, "Lord, no, I haven't." Oh, I want to say, yeah, and I have some questions for you, Lord. I did read your book, and I have some questions, as a matter of fact, that I couldn't find answers to. What an exciting time that'll be when I finally get those answers. But you know what? I'm thinking, but by the time I get there, I'm not going to care. And that's okay, too. Well, I hope you enjoyed the book of Deuteronomy. It went a little longer than what they suggest. They say 10 minutes, but I don't know how you do this in 10 minutes unless you're a fast reader. But they probably didn't plan on somebody talking about it. Well, I hope you have a blessed evening. And remember that you can give your cares over to God. It reminds me, I saw an expression dance. I forget what you call it exactly, where somebody dances to a song and they do expressions and they do movements. And one of them was, I give all my cares to you, God. And I trust you and I leave it at your feet. An interpretive dance, that's what it was. And all these things, and I will not fear, but I'll just pray, you know. And that's what we got to do. You got to give it over to God and just have him handle it. Well, that's all I got for now. You take care and be blessed.